From ancient philosophers to modern power players, there's one tool they've all used. And that tool is silence. Not the silence of fear, but the silence of control, of discipline, of knowing when to hold your tongue and watch everyone else reveal too much. This isn't just about communication. It's about art of doing more by saying less. Because sometimes the most dangerous person in the room isn't the one speaking. It's the one who's listening. We weren't always this loud. There was a time when silence carried weight. But somewhere along the way, noise became the default. Scroll through any social feed and you'll see it. Opinions fired off like bullets. Personal updates posted like breaking news. People talking just to prove they're still here. Not to be understood, but to be seen. We live in a culture where the loudest voice often gets the most attention, not because it's the smartest, but because it refuses to shut up. Everyone is encouraged to speak their truth, to use their voice, to never stay silent. But no one ever talks about the cost of all that talking. When every thought is made public, nothing feels sacred. And when everyone is talking, who's actually listening? French philosopher Blaise Pascal once wrote, "All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone." In conversations, silence is treated like failure, like something awkward, something to be fixed. But here's the truth most people miss. Silence isn't empty. It's full of power, perception, and presence. And in a world addicted to self-expression, the one who knows when to hold back becomes unreadable. And that unreadability is not a flaw. It's a strength. Because when no one knows exactly what you're thinking, they can't predict you. They can't manipulate you. And here's the paradox. The more noise you make, the less people hear you. The more you speak, the less your words mean. So, while the world races to be loud, to be known, to be constantly expressing, the wise step back, and in their silence, they gather power. Before algorithms, microphones, or even paper, the Stoics were already mastering the art of saying less. To them, silence wasn't just polite. It was a daily discipline, a spiritual practice, a tool for sharpening the mind and controlling the self. Epictetus, one of the most revered Stoic teachers, said, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so that we can listen twice as much as we speak." That wasn't a throwaway line. It was a warning, because the Stoics understood something modern minds often forget. The person who reacts to everything controls nothing. In contrast, the silent person practices sovereignty. They choose when to engage, when to let things pass, and when to strike with precision, not emotion. This discipline is rooted in logos, the Stoic belief in rational order, a world where nature has a rhythm, and humans are at their best when they follow it. Speaking less isn't about bottling things up. It's about aligning with what's essential and letting the rest fall away. That's why Stoics spoke in short, clear phrases. They didn't try to impress with complexity. They aimed to be understood, and only when needed. And that minimalism wasn't just about speech. It was about identity. Because once you stop performing, once you stop needing to explain yourself to everyone, you become free. Free from the need to be validated. Free from the pressure to always respond. Free to observe, think, and choose your own path, even if it's quiet. And what's more powerful than that? In a time when reputations were built in the marketplace of words, the Stoics chose stillness. And in that stillness, they found clarity. They found power. And most importantly, they found themselves. Silence, to them, wasn't weakness. It was wisdom made visible. And the strange thing is, as ancient as their insights were, they echo louder today than ever before. Because in a world drowning in noise, the Stoic is still the one who stands tallest by saying the least. Where the Stoics used silence to sharpen the mind, the Zen masters used it to dissolve it. In the temples of ancient Japan and China, silence wasn't just golden. It was sacred. To speak too much was to miss the point entirely. Because in Zen, the truth can't always be put into words. And often, the more you talk, the further you drift from what's real. Zen doesn't give you clear answers. It gives you paradox. It gives you stillness. It gives you the sound of one hand clapping and asks you to listen. The Zen master doesn't explain the path. He watches. He waits. And if you ask too many questions, he may just respond with silence. Or maybe even a slap. Because silence in Zen isn't passive, it's active. It's a force. It's the teacher behind the teacher. There's a famous story in Zen tradition. A student approaches the master and says, "Master, please explain the essence of Zen." The master looks at him, then slowly closes his eyes. The student is confused. He asks again. The master opens his eyes and walks away. No words, no explanation, just silence, sharp as a sword. And somehow, the student understands. Because in that moment, the master wasn't ignoring him. He was giving him something deeper than language. He was pointing to the truth, not with speech, but with space. In Zen, silence isn't the absence of sound. It's the presence of awareness. When your mind finally stops chasing, judging, labeling, that's when the real insight appears. Not from a sentence, but from stillness. Zen monks would spend hours in seated meditation, facing a blank wall. No music, no mantra, just breath and silence. And from that discipline came a kind of power that can't be performed. A presence that doesn't need to be announced. The idea is simple, but radical. Words divide. Silence unites. Speech makes things separate, but silence brings you into the present, where those divisions fade away. This is why Zen doesn't fear silence. It welcomes it, because in silence, everything becomes clear. In fact, one of the most important Zen teachings goes like this. Don't seek the truth, just stop cherishing opinions. And how do you stop cherishing opinions? You go quiet. You observe the mind, without feeding it. You let go of the urge to speak just to be right, just to be heard, just to exist louder than someone else. And in that space, you begin to see things as they are, not because someone explained it, but because the noise finally stopped long enough for the truth to rise. Zen teaches us that silence isn't just the path to wisdom. Sometimes it is the wisdom. And once you understand that, you don't need to prove anything to anyone. You don't need to speak to be powerful, because your presence says more than words ever could. Silence might be spiritual, but it's also tactical. In the real world, in boardrooms, negotiations, politics, and leadership, silence isn't just a virtue. It's a weapon, because silence doesn't just keep you calm. It keeps you in control. Here's the truth. The person who talks the most in any situation usually holds the least power. Why? Because every word is a reveal, a map of how your mind works. But the person who says little, they stay unreadable, unpredictable, unbreakable, and that's exactly what makes them powerful. Machiavelli, one of history's most misunderstood philosophers, understood this better than most. He warned that in politics and power, what you don't say matters more than what you do. The vulgar crowd is always taken by appearances, he wrote, and silence, more than anything else, creates appearance. It creates mystery, and mystery breeds authority. Think about it. Who commands more attention in a room? The person who talks constantly, trying to impress, or the one who listens carefully, then speaks only when it matters? It's not just perception, it's strategy. In negotiations, for example, there's a rule. Whoever speaks first loses. Why? Because when you fill the silence, you show your hand. You reveal what you want, and you often end up conceding just to ease the discomfort of the pause. But the person who holds the silence, they watch, they wait, they control the frame. You see this in leadership too. The junior employee explains every move, tries to prove value with words. The seasoned leader stays quiet, makes decisions, not justifications. They don't rush to defend. They don't argue with critics. They choose when to engage and when to let silence speak for them. That restraint doesn't signal weakness. It signals strength, because it says, I don't owe you anything. I'm not rattled. I don't need to be understood right now. I'm here to observe, to decide, and to act. Even in relationships, silence shifts the power dynamic. The person who over-explains, who defends, who constantly responds, they start to look insecure. But the person who simply listens, who gives space instead of answers, who chooses when to respond and when not to, they gain a kind of quiet dominance. That dominance doesn't come from being cold. It comes from being centered. Because when you no longer feel the need to react to every comment, every criticism, every moment, you become unshakable. And the truth is, most people aren't used to silence. They find it uncomfortable, even threatening, which is why it works. Because when you stop feeding the noise starts to eat itself. And in the ruins of all that talking, guessing, reacting, you're still standing. Not louder, just stronger. When you fall silent, especially in moments when others expect you to speak, you trigger a powerful psychological reaction. Projection. People begin to fill in the blanks themselves. They guess what you're thinking. They assume motives. They imagine meaning where none was given. And here's the secret. That imagined meaning? It's almost always more dramatic than the truth. This is what makes silence so effective. It lets others reveal more than you ever could by speaking. In negotiations, this is a classic move. Make your offer, then stop talking. Let the silence grow uncomfortable. 9 times out of 10, the other side will speak, and often concede, just to break the tension. It's not magic. It's human nature. We're trained from birth to avoid awkward pauses, to respond immediately, to prove we're listening, to fill every crack with words. But the person who can withstand silence controls the pace of the interaction. They don't chase approval. They don't need reassurance. They let others unravel while they remain still. And that stillness is interpreted subconsciously as strength. Because here's what most people never realize. Talking is a submission signal. It often signals that you're trying to explain, to justify, to seek validation. But not talking, that signals confidence, that you don't need to prove anything, that you're comfortable with your position and theirs. That's why in meetings, the quiet person is often perceived as more competent. They haven't revealed their weaknesses. They're unpredictable. They might be a genius or a threat. Either way, they command attention. In job interviews, the candidate who listens more and asks better questions often stands out more than the one who oversells themselves. Why? Because they create mystery, and mystery pulls people in. Silence also triggers what psychologists call status asymmetry. In simple terms, the person who talks less appears to have higher status. This is why powerful people often speak slowly, selectively, and briefly, and why the less powerful talk quickly, constantly, and nervously, trying to fill the space. But here's the twist. You don't need to be powerful to use silence. You just need the discipline to hold it. That alone shifts how people see you. And in conflict, silence can be devastating. When someone criticizes you and you don't respond right away, it creates doubt. Are you offended? Are you unfazed? Are you plotting something? They don't know. And that uncertainty changes the entire tone of the interaction. In arguments, silence is often stronger than logic, because logic invites debate. But silence, it shuts the game down. It says, I don't need to convince you. And that, more than any clever comeback, wins respect. Even in personal relationships, silence creates space, not just for yourself, but for others to reveal who they really are. Sometimes, the best way to learn someone's truth is to stop speaking and let them keep going. People will always show you who they are, if you give them enough quiet to do it. So the next time you're tempted to fill the air with explanations, defenses, or noise, try this instead. Say less, wait longer, watch more, and you'll start to see what most people miss. Not all silence is created equal. Sometimes it's passive, hesitation, fear, uncertainty. But strategic silence? That's something else entirely. It's intentional, precise, and it comes in 3 distinct forms, each one a different kind of power move. 1. The ambiguity silence. This one is subtle and dangerous if misused. It's the art of being deliberately unclear. You don't lie. You don't manipulate. You simply don't clarify. You leave just enough room for interpretation. Politicians do this all the time. They speak in sweeping, inspiring terms, but avoid specific commitments. That way, multiple groups can hear what they want to hear. Is it deceptive? Not necessarily. It's strategic, because the moment you define everything, you limit your options. You invite attack. You lock yourself into a path. But when you remain just ambiguous enough, you maintain flexibility. You're free to pivot, adjust, or exit without contradiction. In leadership, this kind of silence keeps you from being prematurely cornered. In relationships, it helps you stay aligned with your own evolving needs. In competition, it keeps opponents guessing, and guessing means hesitation. Used ethically, this silence doesn't manipulate. It protects. It keeps power from slipping away through unnecessary detail. Because in many cases, clarity is a gift, and gifts shouldn't be given carelessly. 2. The authority silence. You've seen this before. The leader who walks into a room and doesn't say much, but when they do speak, everyone listens. That's not charisma. It's calculated silence. This form of silence isn't just about holding back. It's about creating weight. When you speak less often, each word carries more value. When you don't respond to every question or critique, people lean in harder when you finally do. This is how presence is built, not by constantly proving yourself, but by allowing your silence to create curiosity. Think of the CEO who doesn't explain every decision, the martial artist who doesn't brag about their skill, the teacher who pauses and lets the class sit in the question before offering an answer. That pause, that stillness, it creates gravitas. People assume there's more beneath the surface, and they respect you for it. Because when you don't rush to speak, it tells the room one thing: I don't need attention, I have presence. And that kind of presence can't be faked. 3. The listening silence. This is the most underestimated form of silence. You say nothing, but you learn everything. When you enter a room and speak last, you gain more than just patience. You gain intel. Let others rush to speak. Let them show their cards. Let them reveal their insecurities, assumptions, and desires, all while you stay silent and absorb. This kind of silence turns you into a mirror. People will reflect themselves onto you without realizing it. In one-on-one conversations, it gives you control without dominance. In negotiations, it gives you leverage without pressure. In conflict, it gives you clarity without escalation. Because when others speak first, they commit. When you listen first, you adapt. And in strategy, adaptability always beats speed. Silence is power, but silence alone isn't enough. Because the most dangerous strategist isn't the one who never speaks. It's the one who knows exactly when to. Knowing when to speak is just as important as knowing when to stay quiet. Because words, like weapons, are only effective when timed with precision. Break your silence too early and you lose leverage. Hold it too long and you risk becoming irrelevant. But break it at the right moment, and your words cut through the noise like a blade. So how do you know when to speak? It begins with one question. Does this serve a purpose, or just a pattern? Most people speak out of habit. They fill space. They explain things no one asked for. They defend themselves when they're not under attack. They try to win arguments that don't matter. But the strategist? They speak only when the impact is greater than the cost. Speak to clarify, not to convince. There's a difference between clarity and persuasion. Clarity serves the moment. Persuasion serves the ego. When someone misunderstands your intention and it matters, speak. When a decision must be made, speak. But when people argue just to be right or fish for reactions, let silence be your answer. Not everything requires your correction, and not every debate deserves your energy. Speak to command, not to complain. There's a time to challenge, to correct, to confront, but complaints weaken your stance. They reveal frustration instead of authority. So if you break silence, do it from strength, not from stress. Speak when your words move the situation forward, not when they simply release tension. Because a single calm statement from a quiet person can silence a room more effectively than any shouting ever could. Speak to shift, not to share. We live in a culture that glorifies sharing, but sharing for its own sake is a trap. It exposes more than it protects. And once it's out there, you can't take it back. So if you speak, do it to shift energy, to change the tone, to direct the next move. Don't speak just to express. Speak to influence. That's what the most powerful people in any room understand. Words are not for venting, they're for shaping. And when used right, a single sentence, timed correctly, can do more than 1,000 explanations. So when should you break the silence? When your silence is no longer strategic, but confusing. When your words are backed by observation, not insecurity. Or when you're not reacting, but responding with intent. Because at the highest level, silence and speech are not opposites. They're partners. Each makes the other stronger. Silence builds tension. Words release it. Silence creates mystery. Words deliver impact. Silence earns attention. Words direct it. So speak, but speak like a knife, sharp, clean, and only when needed. In a world that measures intelligence by how fast you talk and values presence by how often you're seen, choosing to say less is an act of rebellion. But it's more than rebellion. It's strategy. It's wisdom. It's strength wrapped in stillness. Because what the loud forget is that silence is remembered longer than noise. The Stoics knew this. The Zen masters lived it. Machiavelli weaponized it. And today, the most effective communicators still rely on it. They don't rush to speak. They don't compete to be heard. They wait. They listen. And when they speak, the room leans in. That's not charisma. That's discipline. Because anyone can talk, but it takes restraint to observe. It takes clarity to say only what matters. And it takes confidence to let silence carry the weight. Let others broadcast their thoughts like confetti. You choose your words like a blade. Not every opinion needs a voice. Not every moment needs a comment. And not every silence needs to be filled. Sometimes, the most commanding thing you can do is say nothing. Let others explain. Let others justify. Let others seek validation. You watch, listen, move with purpose. Because when you master the art of saying less, you become harder to read, harder to manipulate, and impossible to ignore. And that's the final paradox. The one who says the least often has the most to say. If you've made it this far, chances are you already feel it. That quiet pull, that instinct that maybe you've been saying too much, giving too much, revealing more than necessary. You're not alone. Most people speak to be understood, but the ones who rise, they learn to understand before they speak. So here's a challenge. This week, say less, watch more, and notice how the world reacts differently when you choose your silence. Not out of fear, but out of strength. Because silence isn't about disappearing. It's about becoming undeniable, without making noise. If this resonated with you, subscribe for more ideas like this. Drop a comment, or don't. Sometimes, just sitting with the message is enough. Until next time, speak less, move smart, and let your silence do the talking.